Every year, Dane and his closest friend made their annual trip to visit his grandparents' cabin in the North Georgia mountains. It was a quiet, peaceful town. Safe, serene, the perfect getaway. Dane, his friend, and his grandpa were all lovers of the outdoors, always looking for their next adventure. That night, they decided on a simple night hike, nothing unusual. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the mountains grew darker, the woods eerily still. Unbeknownst to them, something was waiting. Something unseen, lurking just beyond the trees, watching, waiting for them to step into the unknown. As they arrived at the trailhead, their excitement faded. Parked near the entrance was an old, beat-up black Chevy SUV. The vehicle sat motionless, its rusted frame blending into the darkness. Inside, two middle-aged men lingered, barely visible through the dim glow of the dashboard. They weren't talking, they weren't moving, just watching. A heavy silence filled the air. Dane and his friend exchanged uneasy glances. This was supposed to be a safe area, but deep in these woods, strange things could happen. Drug deals, disappearances, worse. Without a word, they decided to leave. Something about this felt wrong. The new trail was quiet, untouched, the kind of place where the world felt far away. Their footsteps crunched softly against the dirt as they walked deeper into the woods. Then, a sound. A dog barking. Distant but sharp, cutting through the silence. It was relentless, aggressive, like a warning. The group hesitated. Was it just a stray? A hunting dog? Or was someone out here with them? The barking continued, growing more urgent. Unease settled in. They didn't know if the dog was leashed or if something else was waiting just beyond the trees. They decided to turn back. As they neared the truck, a cold wave of fear washed over them. Another vehicle sat directly behind it, headlights on, engine idling. It hadn't been there before. Someone had followed them in. The truck was parked deep enough that no one could see it from the road, which meant whoever was inside had deliberately driven in to find it. For several minutes, they stood frozen, hidden in the darkness, watching. The car didn't move. No doors opened, no voices spoke. Just the steady hum of the engine, like a predator waiting, watching, deciding what to do next. Heart pounding, they slipped behind a massive tree, pressing themselves into the shadows. The car remained, its headlights illuminating the empty trail ahead. Whoever was inside wasn't leaving. Dane's grandpa lifted the night vision binoculars, trying to get a clearer look. But even through the green haze, he couldn't make out much, just a dark silhouette in the driver's seat. Still, they waited, breath held, hoping the car would turn around and leave. Minutes passed like hours. Then, the engine revved. The vehicle crept forward, slowly maneuvering around their truck, and to their horror, it started driving toward them. Panic set in as the vehicle crept closer, its headlights slicing through the darkness. They had seconds to react. Without hesitation, they scrambled up a steep hillside, clawing through thick brush, thorns tearing at their skin. At the top, they collapsed behind a fallen log, barely daring to breathe. Below, the black SUV rolled past the exact spot they had been standing just moments before. Its windows were down, but they couldn't see inside. Just an eerie silence as the car slowed to a crawl. Were they being hunted? Did the driver know they were there? They didn't move. They couldn't. Lying flat against the cold earth, they barely breathed. The SUV rolled past slowly, its tires crunching against the gravel. The windows were down, but no voices came. Just silence, thick and suffocating. Dane's heart pounded in his chest. If they had hesitated even 2 seconds longer, they would have been caught in the headlights, exposed. The SUV lingered, moving at a crawl, as if searching. Then, finally, it kept going, disappearing into the darkness. They stayed frozen, listening, waiting for any sign of it returning. The second it was gone, they knew they had one chance. They ran. The second the SUV was out of sight, they bolted. Adrenaline surged through their veins as they tore down the trail, crashing through the underbrush, every shadow feeling like a pair of watching eyes. Reaching the truck, they scrambled inside, slamming the doors shut. Dane's grandpa wasted no time. He fired up the engine, gravel spitting from the tires as they sped out of the woods. No one spoke. No one looked back. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the hum of the engine cutting through the silent night. Whatever had just happened, they never wanted to know why. Days later, in the safety of daylight, Dane's grandpa and his friend returned to the spot. The forest was quiet, undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. But when they stood where they had hidden, a chilling realization set in the hill they had climbed so desperately was nearly impossible. Steep, tangled with thorns and loose earth. The fact that they had made it up so quickly, unseen, felt like pure luck or something else. They scanned the trail, imagining what could have happened if they had been just a second slower. Somewhere deep in the woods, the answer remained waiting. The Appalachian woods stretched endlessly, a tangled maze of towering trees and whispering leaves. The sun hung low, casting golden light through the thick canopy, but the shadows beneath were deep, too deep. The air was thick, unmoving, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. A narrow, overgrown logging road wound up the mountainside, disappearing into the dense underbrush. He walked alone, boots crunching softly against the dirt, the silence pressing in around him. No birds, no insects, just the eerie quiet of an untouched wilderness. Something about today felt different. The woods weren't just quiet, they were watching. The narrow dirt trail wound deeper into the Appalachian wilderness, the towering trees standing like silent sentinels. Each step echoed in the unnatural quiet, the usual hum of insects and rustling leaves absent. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the forest itself was pressing inward. He glanced over his shoulder. Nothing but endless trees, their twisted limbs stretching like skeletal fingers. Still, unease prickled his skin. Something was off. He quickened his pace, his footsteps muffled by the damp earth. The deeper he went, the stronger the feeling grew. He wasn't alone. Something unseen lurked just beyond the trees. A faint rustling broke the silence. He stopped, turning his head, eyes scanning the dense underbrush. Nothing. Just the endless stretch of trees, their gnarled branches swaying ever so slightly. The air felt colder now, the once warm breeze replaced by something off. He took a slow step forward, then another. A twig snapped behind him. His breath caught. He spun around, heart pounding. Still nothing. The forest stood as it always had, unmoving, indifferent. But he knew, deep in his gut, something was out there, hiding, watching, and waiting. The uneasy feeling clawed at his chest, urging him to move. The trail opened into a vast clearing, bathed in the dying glow of the setting sun. Pine trees stood in jagged clusters, their dark silhouettes stretching toward the sky. At the cliff's edge, the world seemed to fall away, revealing an endless expanse of rolling, mist-covered hills. It was beautiful, breathtaking even, but something about it felt wrong. The silence was deeper here, almost suffocating. He sat, letting the view calm his nerves, but the uneasy feeling never left. The forest behind him felt alive, pressing in. He wasn't sure why, but he suddenly knew. He had stayed here too long. As he started back down the trail, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest into eerie twilight. The air grew colder, the shadows stretched longer. Then, footsteps, faint but unmistakable. He froze, listening. Silence. His pulse quickened. He walked faster. The sound followed, perfectly in sync, stopping when he stopped, moving when he moved. A slow, creeping dread curled in his stomach. Someone, or something, was there. Watching, matching his steps. The trees around him felt closer, the trail suddenly unfamiliar. He swallowed hard, forcing himself forward. He had to get home, but deep down, he knew. He wasn't alone. Then, from the darkness, movement. A figure emerged from the trees, moving fast, too fast. Hooded, dressed in black, its face hidden in shadow. His breath hitched, panic surged. He wasn't imagining this. The figure was real, and it was coming straight for him. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs locked in place. The figure's stride was unnatural, aggressive, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Heart hammering, he stumbled backward toward the gate. His shaking hand reached for his pocket. He had one chance, one warning. His voice cracked as he shouted, "I have a gun." The figure didn't stop. It moved with eerie determination, closing the distance with each silent step. His heart pounded, hands trembling as he gripped the gun. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice barely steady. Nothing. No hesitation. No fear. Just relentless pursuit. A surge of adrenaline took over. He raised the gun and fired. A deafening crack shattered the silence. The figure halted. For the first time, it hesitated. A long, unnatural pause. Then without a word, it turned, retreating into the darkness of the trees. He stood frozen, breath ragged. Whatever it was, it had let him go. His legs finally moved. He ran. Branches tore at his skin. Roots threatened to trip him, but he didn't stop. His breath came in ragged gasps, heart pounding like a war drum. The path blurred past him, the forest a twisting nightmare of shadows and shifting shapes. Behind him, the woods seemed to move, the underbrush alive with unseen presence. Was it following? He didn't dare look back. His only focus was the bottom of the hill. Home. The gate was long behind him, yet the feeling remained. He wasn't safe, not yet. The darkness pressed closer. He ran faster. He burst through the door, slamming it shut, his chest heaving. His father looked up, confusion turning to concern at the sight of him. Pale, shaking, eyes wide with lingering terror. "What happened?" his father asked, voice low, steady. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He swallowed hard, forcing them out. Every detail, every horrifying second. His father listened, his expression unreadable, but when he finished, the silence stretched too long. Finally, his father exhaled, glancing toward the dark window. "You're sure he just left?" He nodded, but deep down, he wasn't sure at all. The Bighorn Mountains, an ancient stretch of jagged peaks towering over Wyoming's untamed wilderness. Nestled between Buffalo and Sheridan, these mountains have seen centuries of hunters, hikers, and explorers. But they have also held secrets, dark ones, secrets that should have never been disturbed. For 4 years, this wilderness had been home, a place of solitude, of survival. The hunting cabin stood at the edge of the tree line, sturdy and weathered, a sanctuary against the untamed wild. He sat on the porch, methodically cleaning his revolver, his thoughts distant. Moving here after high school had been a leap, leaving behind everything familiar for a life of guiding hunters through the rugged expanse of Wyoming. But today wasn't about guiding. Today was about reconnecting. Alyssa was coming, a friend from his past, one of the few who still mattered. Their adventure was about to begin. The truck rumbled down the winding dirt road, kicking up dust as it climbed higher into the mountains. Towering peaks loomed ahead, their jagged edges cutting into the clear blue sky. Inside, the air was filled with quiet anticipation. Camping gear rattled in the back, tents, rifles, fishing rods, everything they needed for a week in the wild. Alyssa stared out the window, eyes wide with wonder, taking in the endless stretch of pines and rocky slopes. The deeper they went, the more isolated they became. Out here, there was no signal, no help, just the mountains, the silence, and whatever lurked within. The stream carved its way through the dense forest, its waters glistening under the midday sun. They walked along its edge, casting lines, lost in conversation. Then, sudden impact. A massive boulder crashed into the water before them, sending a violent spray into the air. Silence followed, thick and unnatural. Slowly, their eyes lifted to the ridge above, and there it stood. A creature, twisted, unnatural. A gaunt, hunched figure covered in patchy fur, its glowing red eyes locked onto them. It wasn't just an animal. It wasn't human either. It was something in between, and it was watching them. For a moment, no one moved. The creature's body was rigid, its glowing eyes burning into them. Then it snarled, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth. The air reeked of decay. It crouched, muscles coiling like a predator ready to strike. His heart pounded as he yanked the revolver from his holster, hands shaking. A single gunshot split the silence. The bullet struck, and the thing let out an unearthly, blood-curdling scream. High-pitched, agonized, wrong. It staggered, its limbs flailing unnaturally before bolting into the trees. The forest swallowed it whole, but its wailing echoed, lingering. They weren't alone. Not anymore. They moved fast, nearly running down the narrow mountain trail. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unseen. Every snapping twig, every rustling branch sent a jolt of fear through them. Behind them, deep in the trees, something followed. Its footsteps unnatural. Too fast. Too light. Then, a low growl echoed through the forest, vibrating in their chests. He stole a glance back. Two burning red eyes flickered between the trees. It was still there. Still hunting. The mountains were vast, but they suddenly felt trapped, swallowed by the wilderness. They had to keep moving, had to escape, had to survive. The cabin felt different now. Once a place of comfort, of solitude, now a fragile barrier between them and what lurked beyond. 3 years had passed, but the memory of that night on Cloud Peak never faded. He sat at the worn wooden table, the soft crackle of the fireplace the only sound in the room. A rifle leaned within arm's reach, a habit he never broke. On the mantel, a framed photo of him and Alyssa, smiling, dressed in hunting gear, standing before the endless Wyoming wilderness. They had built a life out here, became licensed guides, learned every trail, every hidden path. But they never returned to Cloud Peak. Something still lingered there, something not meant to be seen. He had hid it, he was sure of that, yet it survived. And sometimes on the coldest nights, when the wind howled through the trees, he swore he could hear it. That same inhuman wail, distant but unmistakable. A reminder that the mountains had secrets, ancient, untamed, waiting in the dark. They had escaped once, but out here, nothing ever truly disappeared, and some things never stop watching.